California Osha just issued new workplace violence legislation. And although we don't talk about workplace violence that much in safety, it's actually the 5th leading cause of workplace deaths. In this video, we're going to talk about workplace violence, so you understand the basics of how it happens, can identify risks and reduce them, and of course, how to comply with Cal OSHA's new rules. Check out the link in the description below for our Cal OSHA Workplace Violence Prevention Program. If you're outside of California, it may also be useful to know that federal OSHA is currently pursuing steps for adopting a similar standard. This would apply for both healthcare and social assistance industries nationally. So it's worth considering taking some lessons from the Cal OSHA plan and implementing them into your workplace. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. You might wonder, how significant of an issue is workplace violence? Or maybe you're all too familiar with the issue already. Either way, let me know in the comments below what industry you work in and if you deal with workplace violence. It's fun to compare notes and also cool to see who's watching. Like I mentioned in the beginning, workplace violence is the 5th leading cause of workplace deaths. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 20% of all workplace deaths occurring to women were due to homicide in 2019. For men, that number is 7.5%. So yeah, workplace violence is a big deal. In fact, in some years, workplace violence is the #1 killer of women in the workplace. Although I should note here, fewer women die at work every year than men overall from all causes. But the overall percentage of women's workplace deaths caused by violence are typically higher than the percentage of men's deaths due to workplace violence. According to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, also known as NIOSH, workplace violence generally falls into 4 major categories: criminal intent, customer-client, worker-on-worker violence, and personal relationship violence, which overwhelmingly targets women. Think violent exes who know they can find their ex-wife or ex-girlfriend at her workplace. If you work in healthcare, you're probably already aware that workplace violence is a big issue, from people who may be delirious under the influence of drugs, to those with mental health issues, or even a history of violence. In fact, healthcare workers in California are already covered under their own workplace violence standard. Another industry of note, according to OSHA, is taxi drivers, who are more than 20 times more likely to be murdered on the job than other workers. But the overall deadliest situations involve an active shooter. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 392 U.S. workers were workplace homicide victims in 2020. Of those victims who died from homicide on the job in 2020, 81% were male, 44% were aged 25 to 44, 28% were Black, 18% were Hispanic, and 30% of workplace homicide victims were performing retail-related tasks, such as tending to a retail establishment or waiting on customers. So that's a little bit about fatalities. But what about injuries? Of those victims who experienced workplace violence injuries and trauma, 73% were female. 62% were aged 25 to 54, 76% worked in healthcare and social assistance industries, and 22% required 31 or more days away from work to recover. Lastly, 22% involved 3 to 5 days away from work. There's a higher rate of workplace violence for both men and women in healthcare facilities, late-night convenience stores, taxis, ride-hailing services, and customer service offices, where there might be customers angered over something like utility bills or parking tickets. As you might expect, any establishment where alcohol is served, such as restaurants, bars, and casinos, also have a higher risk of workplace violence. So you can see that workplace violence is a big issue when it comes to safety at work. That's what led California Governor Gavin Newsom to recently sign a new law to require employers to take steps to prevent workplace violence. This law goes into effect on July 1st, 2024. The legislation requires employers adopt workplace violence prevention plans, maintain records of any threats or incidents of workplace violence, and provide effective training to workers on workplace violence. The goal of all this is for employers to have a more established and well-thought-out plan to protect employees. You see, it's easy to forget about the prevalence of workplace violence. So employers are being pushed to create a system to recognize risks like lone workers, dangerous locations, and even the potential of interactions with violent members of the public. California employers must establish a written workplace violence prevention plan that includes the name and/or job title of the person responsible for implementing the program, procedures for the employer to receive and respond to reports of workplace violence, and prohibit retaliation against an employee who makes such a report, information about how an employee can report a violent incident, threat, or other concern to the employer or law enforcement without having a fear of reprisal, methods to alert employees of the presence, location, and nature of workplace violence emergencies, evacuation or sheltering plans that are appropriate and feasible for the worksite, information about how employee concerns will be investigated and how employees will be informed of the results of the investigation, procedures to obtain the active involvement of employees in developing and implementing the violence prevention plan, and lastly, procedures to review the effectiveness of the violence prevention plan and revise it as needed. Employers in California should also train workers on what's known as red flag behaviors and ways to de-escalate heated situations. Additionally, employers need to keep a log of all reports of violence or threats and how it was handled. Another important change is that if a credible threat of violence occurs, a supervisor or union representative may apply for a temporary restraining order on behalf of an employee without using the employee's name in the report. This provision is slated to take effect on January 1st of 2025. The new law doesn't apply to employers already covered under California's existing workplace violence prevention standard for healthcare industry employees. It also doesn't apply to employees who are remotely working from a location of their own choice that is not under their employer's control, or work sites that have fewer than 10 employees and are not accessible to the public. For everyone else, again, all of this goes into effect on July 1st, 2024. So make sure you're prepared to comply with the new requirements by then. I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, please hit that like button. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, please hit that subscribe button. As always, thank you so much for watching, take care, and stay safe. Hi, Rachel from Ally Safety here. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the Ally Safety Toolbox Talk membership at allysafety.com. There you'll find an entire library of videos that are created to make safety entertaining. I'll see you there at allysafety.com.